Well, Locke doesn't exactly say. Yes, yes, right. He doesn't exactly say. He raises this question, to be sure, of fundamental importance for constitutional government. Does executive authority, he asks, extend to all things, even or especially in times of war? Think about the debates that are going on now about detainees at Guantanamo, or the issues of domestic spying when it comes to issues of the war on terror. Are these examples of prerogative power, that is to say, the executive acting outside the limits or the bounds of constitutional authority for the sake of protecting the public good? Or are these examples of kind of political absolutism? Is the invocation of this power in some ways going down the slippery slope to despotism and absolutism? I will leave it to you or your sections to try to discuss these matters, but Locke himself praises those who he calls the wisest and best princes of England as being those who have exercised the largest prerogative on behalf of the public good. This is beginning to sound more and more, in some respects, like Machiavelli than the advocate of again, limited government. This power comes into play, he says, especially during times of national crisis or emergency, when it is necessary to act for the public safety in some ways. And again, this seems to have special resonance for us today as we face issues like states of emergency and states of exception. There are, in fact, political theorists. One name comes to mind, a 20th century German legal philosopher by the name of Carl Schmitt, who argued that the state of emergency, or the exceptional situation, is the essence of politics, and that the person or body who has the power to declare the exception is none other than the sovereign. So from Schmitt's point of view, you might say, this idea of prerogative is a kind of extra constitutional power that the statesman must of necessity utilize when ordinary constitutional operations like the rule of law prove to be inadequate. But consider another example, if you like, that prerogative powers may be granted by the Constitution. Consider Lincoln's famous suspension of habeas corpus during the Civil War. Lincoln, interestingly, did not take this extraordinary step by appealing to an extra constitutional power that obtains in times of crisis. Rather, Lincoln argued quite forcefully that this sort of prerogative power is already deeply embedded within the structure of constitutional government. He cites the Constitution when it came to the suspension of habeas corpus. The Constitution writes, "The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety requires it." In other words, the Constitution itself seems to allow for this extraordinary kind of action, at least in cases of rebellion or invasion, when it says the public safety requires it. The Constitution seems to embody within itself, our Constitution that is, this Lockean power of prerogative that comes into effect or can be legitimately exercised in times of rebellion or invasion. Are we living in that kind of age now? Not rebellion, perhaps, but invasion. Well, think about that again. Are these arguments applicable to our situation today in some sense when it comes to debates about the extent of executive power to embark on these extraordinary measures? And yet at the same time, Locke is aware, clearly, of the abuse of these kinds of, or the potential abuse of this kind of prerogative. He asks, who will judge? Who can judge whether the discretion of the executive is being used for the public safety or the public good, or whether it is simply a kind of usurpation of power? In these moments of high constitutional crisis between conflicting powers of government, in such cases, Locke says, there shall be no judge on earth. He says, the people have no other remedy in this but to appeal to heaven. This is in section 168. How much is contained in that term, appeal to heaven? What does Locke mean in terms of high constitutional crisis when he says there is no judge on earth? The people must appeal to heaven. Does that mean they should fall down on their knees and begin to pray what they should do? Unlikely. By an appeal to heaven, Locke means the people's right to dissolve their government. He raises this question at the very end of the book, when a conflict between the people or their representatives and the executive becomes so great that the very conditions of social trust have been dissolved. Who will be judge? And he answers emphatically, the people will be judged. Locke affirms here a right of revolution. An appeal to heaven, or what he calls an appeal to heaven, really refers to an appeal to arms, to rebellion, and the need to create a new social covenant. Locke, you can see, is attempting to hold together a belief in the sanctity of law and the necessity for prerogative that may sometimes have to circumvent the rules of law. Are these two doctrines incompatible? I think in many respects, or at least in some respects, they are. Can the prerogative power of the executive be in a way constitutionalized so that it does not threaten the liberty of its own citizens? Locke alerts us to this timeless as well as this very timely problem. One of the best sources for thinking about many of these constitutional issues today regarding privacy rights and other kinds of citizen rights can be found in, I would say the last 5 chapters or so of Locke's second treatise. I can't think of a better source. So in the end, Locke's appeal to heaven, or Locke says that the people have an appeal to heaven, that is to say, an appeal to arms, an appeal to revolution, suggests that at the end of the day, Locke was a revolutionary, but I would say also a sort of cautious and moderate one, if this is not a complete contradiction in terms. I won't go through chapter 19, the famous chapter on revolution, in full, to talk about the conditions under which he believed the people can rightfully appeal to heaven, as it were. But Locke's doctrine of consent and legislative supremacy, this should make him, in many ways, a hero to Democrats, to radical Democrats. His beliefs about limited government, the rights of property, should make him a hero to, in some ways, constitutional conservatives and even libertarians. In the end, I think Locke was neither or both. Like all of the great thinkers, in some ways, he defies, simple classification. But there is no doubt that Locke gave the modern constitutional state its definitive form of expression. And the problems of our state, the problems, the legal, the constitutional, and political problems that we experience are very much problems rooted in the philosophy of John Locke and are unthinkable without the influence of Locke. So that takes me to a theme that I want to talk about for a little while, which is Locke's America. John Locke's America. No one who reads Locke, even superficially, and I would not accuse anyone here of being a superficial reader, after all, but no one can fail to be impressed of the harmony, in many ways, between Locke's writings and those of the American Republic that he helped to found. His conception of natural law, rights, government by consent, the right to revolution, and all are all part of the cornerstone of our founding documents. To some degree, as I've just been suggesting, a judgment on America is very much a judgment on the philosophy of Locke, and vice versa. In many ways, to the or if anyone is, I think Locke has the title to be considered America's philosopher king. So how should we think of Locke after more or less 3 centuries of consistent Lockean rule? How should we think of Locke? For many years and for many people, even today, the affinity, the affiliation between Locke and America has been regarded in a largely, although not wholly, largely positive light. For many historians and political theorists, our stability, our system of limited government, our market economy has been the result of a sort of broad consensus over Lockean principles, over Lockean first principles. But for many other readers of American history, this relationship has been seen as more problematic. In the 1950s, a book written by a famous political theorist and historian named Louis Hartz, a book called The